Good morning, guys. I have a dried loofah here. Today I'm going to show you how I turn this into one of my everyday square loofah sponges. I sew these up into a nice little square sponge. You can use them for dishes, you can use them for your body. I gifted these a lot last year, so I wanted to give you guys like a step-by-step tutorial on how to do it because it is very easy. So yeah, I have a dried loofah here. I've also done this with your green loofah as well. I have some in the house. I'll show you guys the color difference in a loofah. So you can harvest loofahs when they're green. You don't have to harvest them when they're like this, especially if you're in a shorter season. But I will say when you harvest them when they're green, I have a video I'll post. It is kind of a pain. They're really hard to clean out when they're like this and the seeds are loose and the flesh has dried out. They're a lot easier when they're green. They're a lot more to work with. But when they're dry like this, they give off more of a tan color. And when they're picked green, they give off more of a whiter color. I don't know if that really matters to you. I personally like the more natural linen-y tone. I will be harvesting some of these greens. So I currently have 2 plants growing on this trellis here. If anyone's curious, they're planted at the end and these vines go crazy. So for 2 plants, I've averaged the last 2 years about 20 to 25 loofahs per plant. And this is a 20-foot trellis, and if it was any longer, it would keep going. The vines have already wrapped all the way down to the very bottom, and these plants go crazy. But I am currently sitting, I think at like 5.5 weeks till my first average frost, so I will be harvesting a handful of these green. They are a little bit more of a pain to work with, like I just mentioned, but you can do it either way. I personally like to do it more on the dried style, just because again, it's a lot easier to do. When you harvest them when they're green, you have to use like a jet on a hose, try to get all of those like young seeds out. It's really hard, but you get a really pretty white loofah. But anyway, I'm gonna show you guys how I process this into my everyday loofah sponge. So let's go ahead and get started. So to start, I'm going to get all of the seeds out. I do this by breaking off the bottom and letting the seeds fall into a bowl. And I did count up these seeds. We had 387 seeds total from one loofah. That is absolutely crazy. You can see here that the skin peels off easily, but it does so in small chunks. So by soaking it in water, or I'm actually soaking it in a 1:4 ratio of water and vinegar for 2 to 3 minutes, I'm able to take off the whole peel in one swoop. You do want to soak the loofah because it makes the loofah a lot more flexible and easier to shape. I do my soaking process just with a water and vinegar 1:4 ratio, just to help also kill off any bacteria or anything that might be left behind from outside. And you can also see how much stuff comes off the loofah just by doing this soak for the first round. Once I soak everything, I rinse it off, and now I'm going to cut open the loofah to expose all the inside. So I try to go along one of the spines of the loofah. So the spine of the loofah is where all the seeds are stored, and it meets into that middle section. And you can see there are 4 different areas and they all meet in the middle. So I cut along closest to where the spine is. You can choose any of those locations. Technically there's 8 locations there. Put your scissors right up next to the spine and cut straight up. So I actually cut the loofah in 2 separate ways. I cut from the top to the middle and then the middle to the back portion. And this allows me to lay everything flat into one piece. So once I'm able to lay out the loofah, I continue to cut along each of the 4 spines to where everything's laid out even more nicely. And you can see by doing that, it exposes some of leftover seeds that were harder to get out. And also there's some more gunk in there as well. So at this point, I actually like to fully cut out each of the spine. So don't go too close to the base, as if you do so, you could end up cutting a hole into the loofah. So just cut at the base, but don't go too deep into that. But this allows everything to lay flat and fold up a lot easier. So if you would rather keep them attached, you can, but the end result will be a puffier loofah. So once everything is cut, I do another few rounds of soaking and rinsing until the loofah sits in the water and the water sits clear before I move forward. I have made a few of these, so I do have a few preferences. And another thing I actually really like to do is cut the loofah down to size. So once everything is done soaking and I'm able to lay everything out, you can see we are really just using this as a fabric for whatever we want to make at this point. Now that is this raw form in a fabric. So it's just this loofah sponge fabric. And I actually like to cut it down because it just makes it a little bit cleaner looking. And again, it also allows the loofah to sit a little bit skinnier and flatter. And I feel like I'm able to clean a lot easier when they are like this versus when they are puffier. You're able to get in nooks and crannies a lot easier. I also think they're a little bit easier to hold if you are scrubbing your body. So that is why I have these preferences. But just know you could just go ahead and fold these up and kind of fold in the sides and then sew them up. And you don't have to do any cutting at all. Again, it will just result in a puffier loofah. So when I do cut this though, I actually like to save these little sections for any areas that are like dirty or like bathroom cleaning, one-time uses that I just end up tossing and throw away, and then that way they don't go to waste initially. So to go ahead and sew everything up though, I use a crochet weaving needle and a cotton crochet thread. So I will have both of these linked below if you're interested. I'm able to find them pretty easily at my Joann's or my Michael's, so I'm sure you're able to as well. So I found that anywhere between 60 and 70 inches of twine works best for sewing these up, depending on how big your loofah is. I always advise though to go a little bit longer to make your life a little easier so you don't run out of thread. I take the thread and I put the needle through it, and I place the needle in the middle, and I take each of the ends and I tie 3 knots overlapping as best as I can at the bottom. So I have done this with just 2 knots. I've done it with 3 knots. 2 knots sometimes will still kind of poke through that loofah fabric. So I personally like to do 3 knots overlapping the best I can. This just really helps make sure it doesn't go through and just makes everything a lot more secure. So now it's time to sew. So don't overthink this step. I'm not a professional sewer. I barely have any experience with sewing, but these can look rustic and still look cute. So just sew. Even if you feel like it's not looking good, it will probably look just fine at the end. When I first started making these, they did not look so hot, but they still looked cute in the end. So just trust me on the process here. So I personally like to start on a corner. On each corner, I also like to overlap a stitch twice just to give a little bit more support in each corner and also make them stand out a little bit. So I like to do a stitch every like 1/4 to 1/3 of an inch. Again, don't overthink this. Like, it's a sponge you're going to be using. You're just tying it up and sewing it together so it doesn't fall apart. So it can be however, but I think this is a really good like little ratio to do. So once you get 2 to 3 of the sides sewn up, if you want to add a bar of soap, you totally can. I'm actually going to sew another one of these actually after this one to show you the difference in the color loofahs between a green one and a dry one, and also just to show you the soap bar in there. So once I get all the loofah though sewn up, I do a few knots by weaving my needle and then looping my needle through the thread and pulling through. I do this a few times just to make sure everything is nice and secure. So to demonstrate the bar of soap in the loofah, I'm using one of my green loofahs from last year to show you just the color difference. You can really see here how light in color it is. This one's also quite a bit tinier. This is probably one of the ones that came on toward the end of the season. So when they're not really big and everything, you have some of these smaller ones, but you're still able to use them just as easily. I have found that when the loofah is still green versus when it has dried on the vine, it's just a smidge softer. I don't feel like it makes that big of a difference once the loofah gets wet, but I do like the whiter ones just for the shower and whatnot. So that's why I'm going to do the bar of soap for this one. The packs is going to go in my shower. But just to keep that in mind, I honestly really like the dried ones a lot better. I prefer to work with them, but I just wanted to give you the example here and show you how cool it is to actually put a soap in one of these little loofah sponges. These make amazing gifts. I gifted this to all of my family members last year and they absolutely loved it. Honestly, it was so much fun to make. They don't take that long and it's something that I grew and I made and it was really fun to give out. And who doesn't love a loofah sponge? So you can see here when the loofah is dried versus when it is green, I actually like it so much better just because you can really see the contrast between the white thread and the loofah sponge versus when the loofah is more white. You can't really see that stitching as much, and I personally really like that rustic look on that. So that's just another preference thing. I mean, I use them both. So whatever loofahs I grow, they will definitely be used and made into sponges, but I wanted to give you guys both those little examples. And there you have it. That is how I take a loofah sponge like this and turn it into an everyday sponge. And you can also throw some soap in it as well. I really love making these sponges. They come in handy for so much. I love having loofahs on hand. I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial. If you did and found it helpful, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and share it with a friend. I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye!